people still filtering in, or should we be? I think we should start. What do you guys think? I think we should start. Welcome to New York Comic Con, and welcome to the Mixology panel. Say hello, everybody. I'm Kim Alexander from Sirius XM. I'll be whipping up a perfect cocktail of urban fantasy with these fine authors. Now, with this many people on the panel, and a shortage of microphones, they're actually going to be passing the microphones back and forth. So let's give that a try. We're gonna try out our system. Cami, we're going to start with you. Introduce yourself and the name of your book, and maybe and there it goes, and maybe like a one-line synopsis of Beautiful Creatures, if you don't mind. And then we'll pass the mic down and continue.
I am half of Beautiful Creatures, the co-author Cami Garcia, and it is a Southern Gothic paranormal romance, young adult, that sort of crosses over history, mystery, Civil War, and a lot of powers.
Theo?
Hi, I'm Theo Lawrence. My book is Mystic City. It is an alternate version of Manhattan, where magic is real and the city has become a sort of skyscraping Venice thanks to global warming. And there is a lot of romance and people dying.
I'm Faith Hunter. I write currently the Jane Yellow Rock series. Jane Yellow Rock is a full-blood Cherokee skinwalker, and she is a traveling vampire hunter. Her card reads, Jane Yellow Rock, have stakes, will travel.
I'm Allison Pang, and I write the Aggie Sinclair series. My third book, actually, is A Trace of Moonlight, which comes out in 2 weeks, but I do want to give this away at some point during the panel. So, and Abby is basically just a normal girl with some problems in a crazy city, and she ends up meeting a whole host of crazy creatures, including a very small, perverted unicorn who lives in her underwear drawer and bites her on the ass a lot. Allison Pang? Yes.
I'm Paul Wilson. I write pulp fiction and comic books, and I guess I'm best known for my character Repairman Jack, who's an urban mercenary who keeps running into paranormal activity, and there's a lot of violence and death and things like that, but all in all, it's a lot of fun.
Hello, I'm Kevin Hearne, and I'm the author of the Iron Druid Chronicles. And it's about a 2,100-year-old druid still living among us today, the last of them. And he's kind of hiding out for some Irish gods who want to kill him. So there's a whole lot of not just Irish mythology, but we bring in pretty much all the rest of the pantheons as well. And it's a heck of a lot of fun.
Hi, I'm Nicole Peeler, and I have the speaking today. I write the Jane True series for Orbit Books. It's about a girl who's half Celtic. And I also write paranormal erotica under the name Denise Townsend for Sam Hain. That's our secret. I don't really feel like talking about my books anymore, to be honest. I've been doing it all day. They're kind of like True Blood, but not bloody. Maybe.
Hi, I'm Anton Strout. I write the Simon Cantress Urban Fantasy series and the Spellmason Chronicles, Book 1, Alchemistic, out last week. Plug. Basically, it's kind of a girl meets gargoyle and contemporary Manhattan thing. I apparently missed the Gargoyles cartoon and decided to write glorious fan fiction, kind of.
All right, well, when you're writing urban fantasy, as this panel is devoted to, it has to be a mix of a lot of things. So I've kind of grouped you guys together as best I could, and I thought I'd start with a dash of city, because if it's an urban fantasy, it has to be in the city. And I thought Anton and Theo, you have a couple of things in common. You both have mystic, sort of, in the titles of your books. So I was hoping, Theo, by the way, this is Theo's, not only his debut novel, but his first time here at Comic-Con. So I want to talk about the setting. And Anton, why don't we start with you? How is New York a character in your story?
I moved here in '94 because I was going to be all into theater and stuff and writing, and I fell in love with Manhattan, and the idea that there's weird, spooky stuff happening just out the corner of your eye totally makes sense when you've lived here for a couple years. It's an interesting place, and there's so much history, and there's so much death in a city like Manhattan that you know, if you know about the Potter's Field where Bryant Park is, right behind the main branch of the library, and that just thousands of bodies have been left there, and you're looking for a necromancer to mess up Fashion Week where they put their tent right over Bryant Park. Sounds like a good time to me.
Do you really need a key to get into the park?
Well, for Gramercy Park, in the new series, they have a large Gothic mansion that's kind of on Gramercy Park, which is one of the 2 private parks, and you do have to have a key to get gated into it. And it's very cool, and there's all kinds of statues. I know a guy.
Oh. Anton, your book, by the way, is total architecture porn.
I agree.
Yeah. Theo, you mentioned Venice, and you mentioned New York. Talk about how those things came together.
Yeah, I've also lived in Manhattan for a few years. Anton and I actually moved here together. That is a joke, we have never met. But I think New York is an amazing setting for a novel because it really, I mean, it's called The City That Never Sleeps. It really never sleeps, and it is so alive. And my book actually was inspired by a trip to Venice, where I was just so amazed by that city, and I thought, what if Manhattan was like this, and what if there, instead of streets, there were canals, and how could that have happened? And maybe it never could, but in my mind, it absolutely could have. But I just think there's so much inspiration and so much history.
You also need a shot of history to write urban fantasy, I think we'll all agree. Cami, beautiful creatures, let's start with you. You mentioned Southern Gothic, and it's not Southern or Gothic unless you reach back. So talk about that a little bit, and then we'll talk with Kevin about Druid history.
Beautiful Creatures takes place in a fictitious small town in South Carolina that's just outside of Charleston, so it's situated in a real place. And although it is modern, there is a curse that dates back to the Civil War. So there are Civil War flashbacks, a lot of Civil War history, and I really believe that when you're writing fantasy, especially urban fantasy, in order to suspend disbelief, the magic and those elements can be fictitious, but you need to stay really true to either the history or the real world elements, the architecture, whatever you're talking about that is actually, that you didn't invent. So I was very careful. My family's from the South. You know, I have a relative who was a general for the Confederacy, you know, not proud, but you know, he was. So I did a lot of research, Margaret and I, and especially if you have reenactors in your family, like they're going to catch every single error. So I get a lot of reenactors who come to our events, a lot of men. I have gone on Twitter and said, you know, I need help. I need to know exactly what kind of frock coat would have been worn in this battle and this year. And, you know, ammunition, riflery, you know, I know a lot about very weird things now, but I think that history enriches the story, and in our book, it is part of the story. So it was very important to do the research. And if you pick a topic that you like to write about, the research is fun.
Do you hear from ancient druids going, you got it wrong, dude?
I get some modern folks say, are you starting a new religion? No, but here's the deal with the druids, the real, you know, ancient druids, they never wrote anything down. It was an entirely oral culture, and everything we know about the ancient druids was actually written down by people who didn't really like them. Caesar, you know, he wrote down a whole bunch of things about druids, but he was out to kill them all. And then there was a Greek fellow who wrote some things down about him as they were kind of almost already gone. We have some monks here and there. A lot of the stories that got written down, the mythological cycles, were actually written after the Druids were pretty much gone. And they were, of course, copied at that time. Everything was copied by, you know, Christian monks. So they didn't particularly like the pagans that came before them, but they also recognized that we just can't pretend they never existed. So we have a lot of questionable or, you know, suspect stories about the Druids, and you kind of have to pick and choose what you're going to go with when you see things that are in common among all of the different sources. Well, maybe that's something, you know, I would say, okay, that's something the Druids can probably do since everybody agrees. So I had a lot of fun with it. Because of the lack of historical record, I could really just kind of do what I wanted and say, well, that's the way it was. And it's been a lot of fun, and the people that are modern day Druids today, they will freely admit that we're just making this up. You know, it's a reconstruction, you know, they call it. A lot of it is from the Victorian era, when they started to reconstruct it. And of course, the Druids are now a recognized religion in the UK, with the tax exempt status and all that other good stuff. So, but they, you know, if you ask or you inquire about their history, yeah, they say, we just kind of made it up. So, what we think happened.
And when you're writing urban fantasy, for the perfect ingredient, you have to have animal pals. Now, a lot of you have animal pals in your book, but I wanted to talk specifically to, where is it? Look at your notes, Kim. The dog. Nicole, it's your dog. Okay, so I wanted to talk with Nicole about the Jane True series, and Anyan, who at least part of the time is a dog, and about Faith, because she's got Jane, who has a resident animal pal. So Nicole, talk about the relationship between animals and urban fantasy.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of shape-shifting mythology in every culture. They're a very archetypal myth. I think they speak to our human fantasy of being able to take part in the animal world. We have very limited shapes as humans. We're not very strong compared to other animals. We can't fly. We can't swim. I mean, we can swim, but not like fish. So we're very limited, I think, physically, and I think the shape-shifting mythology really, everyone's leaving. Bye, guys. I love you while you were here. So I think that's a big thing that I think, you know, to a large extent, urban fantasy taps into all these archetypal fears and desires. And that's a really fundamental desire, is to be able to be stronger, faster, you know, quicker, be able to fly or tear the throat out of an enemy. So that, I think, is where we get a lot of our focus in urban fantasy. And then also, obviously, there's the sort of sexy element of magical beasts. So I think that's where Faith comes in.
Sexy elements of magical beasts. I'm not sure that's exactly the right segue, because Jane actually found her beast through black magic, and by accident when she was 5 years old, which sort of wasn't very sexy. It was life or death. However, she does have a current boyfriend who is makes being a werecat sound very sexy. So yeah. But in my case, the skinwalker mythos I chose from the very early pre-white man Cherokee skinwalker mythology. And after the white man came, the Cherokee skinwalker became the Utluna, or the liver eater, or the stone finger. And what they did was they were known for taking a long finger and slitting along the side of a baby and removing the liver and eating it. So they were known to be horrible, horrible creatures. But before the white man came, they were the warriors and the protectors of the Cherokee tribe, and they led the people into battle. Which was why the Cherokees were fairly successful once they got into the Appalachian Mountains, was because they had their Cherokee skinwalkers. And so Jane is the last of her kind, but she accidentally did black magic when she was 5 years old and was fighting for her life against a mountain lion. And she pulled both the body and the soul of the mountain lion inside her, and she became the Tlibdatsi for almost 100 years, where she lived inside the mind of the mountain lion. The series opens at age 12 when she appears out of the jungle. She's been shot by the white man, and it's our current time. And she has no English language and no history and no social skills, and a mountain lion living inside her. So she was not a really fun person to be around until she learned how to be human.
When you're writing urban fantasy, sometimes your characters have a boring day job. Some really boring. Sometimes they even have to sell real estate. And sometimes they have to drive a lot. So F. Paul, let's start with you. Talk about Repairman Jack and grounding him in the reality of a boring day job.
Well, his boring day job is basically fixing situations. He hires out for odd jobs that society and the system can't fix. And so you go to somebody outside the system. He doesn't exist as far as the system is concerned. He has no social security number. He's never paid taxes. All his ID is fake. And no one, not even me, knows his last name. And that's his day job. And that's also his night job. But unfortunately for him, as the way he looks at it, and he was tapped to be in this, and I don't use any real already existing mythology. I just have the old, well, it's sort of Lovecraftian, the cosmic horror, where there are two vying forces out there, and I don't even give them a name. It's not good and evil, it's evil and indifferent. And that's a very sort of Lovecraftian existential way of looking at the universe. And it's not a friendly universe out there. And he's drawn into the conflict, and I made a point of making Earth not the big prize. Earth is just another marble in the collection, and whoever gets the most marbles wins. So we're not even the grand prize that people are fighting over. So it's sort of a more sobering look at the universe, and not particularly cheerful. And that turns out to be, he turns out to be a player in this, much against his will, but he's drawn into it and can't get out.
Allison, talk about Abby, and in Trace of Moonlight, I mean, there's a lot of movement between real and unreal. How important is it to ground Abby in the real world?
So much of the book actually takes place in a dream space. So she does find out later she's a dream walker of sorts. So a lot of things happen in dreaming. There's also a part of the world known as the Crossroads, which is a realm that you can use to transfer between normal Earth and I have it split up into heaven and hell and fairy, basically, very much like the True Thomas poem, if any of you are familiar with that at all. And so her day job, for the most part, during the day is just a bookseller in this really awful, rundown used bookstore that's actually owned by a fairy princess who is currently off the scene. And so she's just stuck in this place where she has to, she doesn't even know what kind of book she's going to get on a daily basis, and they're really awful. And then she's also known as the touchstone for this fairy princess. So what ends up happening is when the princess disappears, people start coming to her for answers. So she has to really have a better foundation in what's going on in the real world in order to help answer the questions of these mythical beings that are coming to her.
Let's add some gods and goddesses into the mix. I think that would be appropriate. Kevin, Atticus has run into, fought with, slept with just about every god and goddess in the different pantheons.
Wow.
What are your favorite places to draw inspiration, and talk a little bit about doing research on mythology?
Well, I really enjoy the Irish mythology. I didn't see too much of it out there, aside from the Morrigan and the Wild Hunt. That's kind of what I was seeing in some other fiction that was out there, and I knew there was more to it, and I wanted to read more, but nobody was writing it, so I decided I would. And I enjoyed the research with that, because there's a really rich pantheon there with little differences from what we might be all used to. For example, Flittish, the goddess of the hunt for the Irish, is almost identical to Artemis and Diana from the Greco-Roman tradition, except for one very important difference. She is not having of that virginity stuff. She's going to, in fact, she's rather famous in Irish mythology for her libido. And so it's kind of like the Irish had maybe heard of the Greco-Roman stuff and said, no, how can we make this better? Sex! And then, so the Greco-Romans, kind of gradually show up throughout the series. And then there's a lot of Norse stuff, and I love going into reading the prose and the poetic Eddas, and those are just online. The translations in English are just out there on the net for free. And so is all the Irish stuff. It's all out there for free. And a lot of people just never take the time to go back and read the original source. A lot of that stuff is online through universities. So I'm going to be stretching it a little bit more with some other pantheons, because they all do exist in my worldview. Because I was thinking, well, if I'm going to make the Irish gods real, why aren't the others real? why be exclusive like that? So once I asked that very simple question, it made the world a lot more fun to work with. Like, oh, I've got everything. So yeah, I'm enjoying the heck out of it. My research continues, and I'm growing as a person just because of all the research that I'm doing. I love it.
Faith, you're talking about Jane Yellowrock and your interest in Native American mythology. How did you get interested in that and talk about, again, an oral tradition and translating that into the page?
I got into it because I found out I wasn't white. It was dangerous, especially in the very deep South, to be mixed race. And so apparently all of the previous generation hid that they were not white. And when they died, we found out all sorts of cool stuff about them, so that I am probably 40% mixed Choctaw and Cherokee, and probably 20% African. And the rest is a bizarre mixture of Western European and Bavarian, because my family has been here since the early 1600s. So when you discover that, you think, well, cool, they've lied to me forever. Now I've got to find out who I really am. And I started doing a lot of research because I discovered that I was a direct descendant of Sehoy III, who is one of the best known Cherokee females. They call her a Cherokee princess, but Cherokees don't have princesses. So I started tracking back the family line, and that led me into a real appreciation of the mythology. So the way you learn it, because it is an oral tradition, you have to find an elder. It's not well written down, and I did find an elder whose father was a shaman and whose grandfather was a shaman, and she had their medicine bags. They are most of the mythology. I can talk to her and get the earliest mythology, the pre-white man mythology, and that was very important for me to be able to have that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
If you're writing urban fantasy, nobody will pick it up unless it has a love story. I think that's pretty clear. And Cami and Theo, I wanted to let you guys talk about writing a love story, making it honest and making it real.
Margaret and I, my writing partner, we didn't write Beautiful Creatures to be published. I was a teacher for 17 years, and Margaret wrote video games. And her daughters were some of my students, and I also have a much, much younger teenage sister. And we wrote Beautiful Creatures for 7 teenagers who told us that they were tired of vampires and werewolves in teen fiction. They were tired of girls that needed to be rescued and never had any power. In urban fantasy and adult, you see a lot of very powerful women characters. 6 years ago, that was not the case in teen. And they said, we're also really tired of the idea that these stories take place anywhere. You know, they're generic. There's no sense of setting or place that you get when you read something like Tolkien or older fantasy. So Margie and I went to our favorite Mexican restaurant, and we were like, we could totally do that. And my family's from a small town in the South, and I told her how my aunts walk their cat on a leash, and you know, like, I believe in, I have your sensibility about religion with superstition. I embrace superstitions of every culture equally. I believe them all. So we talked about that. We talked about the fact that we have 6 brothers between us, and we could write very easily from the point of view of a boy, and our girl would be the supernatural. And we talked about what would it be like if the girl was the powerful supernatural and the boy was the regular one, you know? Like, what kind of boy would this be? Would he be intimidated? Like, would he really fall in love with this, like, powerful girl? And in our universe, our supernaturals are kind of a mix between, like, comic book kind of X-Men-ish, you know, with different powers and witches. So Lena, who is our heroine, is the most powerful caster in her line. So she literally can, like, you know, control the natural environment. So she's super powerful. And we thought about what would that look like? What kind of boy could handle that, you know? And it's funny because in the beginning he kind of can't handle it and it's intimidating, but he gets to know her and they do fall in love. But for us, the love story, we didn't want to just write a love story. We wanted to write something to kind of, well, win the bet and blow the minds of the teenagers. But more importantly, we wanted to write something that felt more real, and so they became friends, and then they ended up falling in love and save each other in a lot of ways, which is what we felt was important, because the girls that we know don't really need saving. So we figured we'd write about them instead of the ones that, you know, are in need of rescue.
Theo, you've got a beautiful love story in your book.
Thank
and
you.
by the way, I knew who the bad guy was. If you haven't read Mystic City, I'm not going to tell you, because he parts his hair on the side. You mentioned that several times. You know who did that? Hitler. That's how I knew. Theo, talk about the love story in Mystic City.
Sure. I mean, who doesn't want to fall in love? I think the amazing thing about writing fiction is that you can imagine a kind of uber romance. You know, if I was drawing on my own life, I'd probably just write about characters who fell in love with people who didn't love them back. That's sort of a joke. But in Mystic City, the main character is named Arya, and I've always had a passion for Romeo and Juliet, so that definitely was inspiration for this story. And she is the daughter of sort of a rich political figure in the upper parts of Manhattan. And he has a family that he has been feuding with, who sort of controlled the political reins of Manhattan. And the book wakes up with her going to her engagement party, and she has no memory of the boy who she's supposed to be engaged with, too, actually. And so she is trying to uncover this love that she believes she may have had when sort of there's someone else who swoops in, who makes her remember that there might have been something, a reason why she has no memory of this other person. And I just think that reading about characters who can find that person who they are passionate about and who makes them sort of tingle and go all kinds of crazy is exciting, and I love reading books like that. And I can relate to not wanting a book to be just a love story and wanting multiple layers of very interesting things, but you know, I just love finishing a book where characters get together and you can say, oh my god, or they die.
Allison, Abby is involved in a little bit of a sexy fun times love triangle. Talk about Tolliver and... I just asked you how to pronounce his name, it escaped right out of my head. Ian. Talk about writing a love triangle as opposed to a straight-up love story.
Straight-up love story, yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing because in the first book, A Brush of Darkness, Abby does hook up with an incubus, who of course is a sex demon, so there's all kinds of fun shenanigans involved with that. And it's funny because when I originally wrote it, it was a paranormal romance, which meant there was a happily ever after, and they went off into the sunset. And then when I sold the book, they said, no, we're going to make it an urban fantasy, and he has to leave. I said, oh, okay. And so they had me bring in another guy. So my second guy is named Tolliver, and he is an elven prince, actually. And both guys are a little bit different. I mean, the incubus, of course, being a sex demon, he's basically the ultimate wish fulfillment of anything you want. He can pretty much provide for you, and that's kind of a tempting offer for a lot of people. So think about it. I don't know.
We are.
You know, he basically can shapeshift into anything you want. You know, whatever you find most attractive is what he will become for you. So, which is very cool. But you know, there's a little bit more to love than just sex, unfortunately. So Tolliver is an elvish prince, but he's actually a little bit more on the level. Abby has a lot of physical issues. She was in this terrible car accident at one point, so she had been a ballerina, and she lost the ability to dance, and now she lost her mother in this car wreck, and so she's a bit of a mess, and the elvish prince actually is as well. And I don't know if you guys are very familiar with elvish lore, but there's this sort of an idea that if you don't have physical perfection, you can't actually rule. I don't know if there's, you know, something along those lines. And he actually was the victim of some pretty awful stuff, which I don't get into until the third book, so I won't spoil anybody. But they call him the crippled prince because he's got a pretty messed up leg himself, and he's got some scars, and he's missing an eye. So he's sort of the exact opposite of the sexy incubus in a lot of ways, but he knows very much about what she goes through and what it's like to have physical limitations. So it's just a very interesting line to have to walk as to who she's going to end up with.
Faith said a couple of minutes ago, they've lied to me my whole life. I have to find out who I am. I think you were referring more or less to yourself.
Yes.
But I want to talk about in the context of the characters. Nicole, Jane, she wasn't lied to so much as her ancestor really just wasn't spoken about. But she does have to figure out who she is.
Yeah, and my character is half Celtic. And when I was a teenager, I read a bunch of Celtic mythologies, and they're all about, beautiful woman shows up in the middle of the night and, marries a fisherman, or he steals her seal skin knowing that then she can't shapeshift back into a seal. And, they live together in harmony and happiness, and they have children. And then eventually one of the kids is like, look, Mom, I found a seal skin. And she always leaves, and she leaves for her sea husband in the sea. And for me, I was always obsessed with, well, what happened to the kids? And in some of the myths, the kids stay with the dad on land. And other ones, they take, she takes the kids back into the sea. And, what is it to be of two worlds and be forced to live in one? I was really always fascinated by that idea. And I think we all are. We all feel torn between identities, and there's always things we wish we could be, but, we probably are. We would like to be a bigger, bolder version of ourselves. But, we know we might not actually want to live that life. So I think a lot of us feel torn, and I think that that's one of the tropes that urban fantasy really slots into, which epic fantasy does to a large extent too, that kind of hero or heroine's journey. But the nice thing about urban fantasy is it kind of puts it on our playing fields. So instead of, a world that, while beautiful, like Tolkien, and richly, adapted and whatever, it's still a very different world. Here it's New York or Maine or any other cities we write in. So I think it brings that idea of dual identity and kind of seeing if you can really grow as a person into our world, which is, I think, one of the things that urban fantasy brings.
Paul, at what point did Jack become Repairman Jack? Talk about his evolution and his evolving identity.
Well, that's what I'm writing now. I'm writing sort of a prequel trilogy of when he first comes to New York City after having killed someone back in New Jersey, and he's starting to learn the ropes. When I started the character, it was going to be a one-shot. I didn't envision a series, and I took Jason Bourne and turned him on his head. And so Jack has no CIA training, he doesn't know Black Ops, he is not an ex-Navy SEAL, he's not an ex-cop. He's on his own, and he has to learn how to live and survive in New York City. He comes there in 1990, when it was pre-Disney. Times Square still had the Grindhouse movies and the XXX places. And the prostitutes on 9th Avenue behind the Port Authority were still lifting their tops to show you they really were women. I know, I had driven by a number of times. Went around the block a few times, So I did everything to make him not the typical thriller hero. And so now he's in the city, and he's sort of learning to become that guy. And it's he's making a lot of mistakes. It's a lot of fun because I've written about. I started Jack when he was already fully formed as an urban mercenary. By the way, he hates the name Repairman Jack, but he's stuck with it. So here it is. He's getting his first gun. He's getting involved with jihadists. He's getting involved with sex slavery. And he thought he was just going to get a whole new life and be in control of things, but he's not. And that's the big irony of the whole series. His whole idea of coming to New York City was to establish autonomy, where no one was going to. In a way, he's an anarchist. And anarchy does not mean no rules; it means no rulers. And so he wants to be autonomous, but slowly throughout the series, he realizes his whole life has been manipulated by other forces. And that's the huge irony of the series. But here he is, he's just starting out, and it's like writing about a new character because he's really a callow guy from New Jersey.
We're going to open the floor for questions. I'm going to ask you to come up here in just a couple of minutes. But when you're writing urban fantasy, you have your heroes, and you also have your villains. All of you have bad guys. So I thought we'd start at the end. Grab the mic. And talk a little bit about writing villains. It's got to be fun.
I enjoy villains because if my characters are happy, I'm doing something wrong, so I need to torture them. And they're the ones who get to do the torturing. I think the fun part for me for villains is kind of, you don't want to make them snidely whiplash, tying people to the train tracks and what have you. You want them to be real because to their mind, villains are the heroes of their own story. They have ideologies, they have motivation. And they have to be good other than, I want to rule the world, unless you're Dr. Horrible, which kind of doesn't totally right in its own perfect way. So for me, it's always, you have your monsters, which might be like a shark. Like a shark's not bad. It will eat something if it's in front of it. Does that make it a villain? Maybe in a Jaws-y kind of sense, but you don't really blame Jaws for doing what Jaws does, as it were. But as far... You do? Okay. After the panel. But for me, the villains are always just, it takes me a while to get to them. I know the big bad things they want to do. I just have to then, to myself, as I'm writing a story, get kind of the why behind the scenes for them, the motivations to everything. And I like them a lot, really, when it comes down to it in the end.
Nicole?
I'm a literary academic by trade, and one of the things I studied for my PhD was the pre-ideological formation of values. Say that 5 times fast. So I'm really obsessed with how people come to believe what they believe, and how what we think is right is actually just a set of formative values that we've had created by society and the people around us, and formative experiences. So people who are evil don't know they're evil, right? Like Hitler was never like, I'm going to be bad today. He really thought he was doing the right thing for Germany and for the world. And we look at him and we see a monster, and he did not wake up every morning saying, I'm a monster, I'm parting my hair down the side. So that's what I like about writing evil characters, is to write a character who just thinks really off, and figuring out why they think off, and what's actually wrong about thinking off, right? How does thinking something lead to evil acts, even when a thought itself might not necessarily be evil, if that makes any sense. My books are not that philosophical, by the way. This is just what I like to think I'm creating, and then what I really create is like evil elves and dragons. So, but that's sort of the kernel that never quite sprouts, probably for the good of everyone.
Kevin?
I like ambiguous characters that, you kind of like them, and then they'll do something or say something like, wait, maybe I should reevaluate this person. And so I have fun with Leif Helgerson, who is, a vampire, the only one I really have, in the series, and he's a lawyer, and he seems to be a stand-up kind of vampire blood-sucking guy. But he eventually reveals that he's really motivated by his self-interest, which is pretty much what every villain will do. And then you have Coyote, who's also very ambiguous. But, the mistake that the hero always makes is thinking that other people will always be as generous as he or she is, And so then they get taken off guard. Or how can you be so selfish? How can you, want whatever it is that you're after? So I've been enjoying that part of it and figuring out how everybody, even the hero will have their own selfishness, right? So everybody has that within them, and then it's the degree to which we give into that kind of turns us evil in the eyes of other folks. So.
I like a conflicted villain. You don't want a hero who's pure good, and I don't think you want a villain who's pure bad. Actually, in The Tomb, the first Repairman Jack novel, Kusum is a Hindu, and he is really an honorable man. He has made a vow on the blood of his parents who were slaughtered that he would wipe out this family, that the family of the captain who had killed them, down to the last person in that family. And he is keeping that vow. And he gets to the point where he's killing two little, innocent little old ladies, and finally he has to kill a little girl. And he's repulsed by this. And he's looking for a way out, but he is going to keep that vow somehow, unless he's somehow released. And there's nobody to release him from the vow. So he's got to go through with it. And Jack is in his way, because Jack has his code, and you're not going to do this. So I actually made them flip sides of the same coin. They might be friends if things were different, if their paths weren't coming head-on collision. So that to me he's, I think, my most interesting villain that I've ever had. And I actually got to like him, and admire him, but he had to be stopped.
I am actually one of those authors that will occasionally put real people in my books. Yeah, I'm not going to say who exactly it is, but there is at least one villain in the first book who was probably based off of an ex-boyfriend, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But yeah, I do tend to like more gray villains. I find that in my case, the main villain's name is Maurice, and what drives him is ambition. So there's always looking for power and whatnot. But in this case, Abby has taken over the position that he once had. So he's got a lot of issues with that, and he wants it back, but he wants more than what he had. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been kicked out to begin with. So throughout all three books, it's basically what he's doing behind the scenes. He's kind of one of those great and powerful Oz guys. He's hiding behind a curtain, and he makes a lot of other people do his work for him. He makes all these crazy contracts with demons and all kinds of awful things to get what he needs done. He doesn't like to be right on the forefront, at least until the very end. So.
Because she's a skinwalker who hunts vampires, the obvious bad guy in the series would be the thing that she's tracking down, the eater of humans, the Utluna, the vampire who has gone rogue. But those are not really the true bad guys in the series. The bad guys are the people who betray her. For all of us, as writers, as human beings, when those we love betray us, that's the real evil that's done to us. That's what scars us. That's what haunts us. That's what leaves us broken. And Jane is very, very broken from the very beginning of the series all the way up through the book that I just turned in, where we discover why she is really so broken. So those who have damaged her, those are the true evil ones, and yet she's got to live with those. She's got to live with the memories. She's got to live with the people. She's got to live with the betrayers, just like we all do. If you have a backstabber at work, you still might have to keep working with that person. And that's painful, and it breaks us in a lot of ways. And if we survive it, it makes us stronger. So those are the bad guys that I like, the ones that come out of nowhere, that Jane trusts and Jane loves, and they hurt her because they have to, or because it's their nature.
It's hard to go at the end of this question because I feel like all the good answers have been taken. Yeah, I think Allison said she likes villains who are gray. I feel like I like villains. I like 50 Shades of Grey villains.
It's a different
I feel like I like in Mystic City, there are people who the main character Arya has grown up being taught are evil, who actually maybe aren't. And I feel like that's potentially one type of villain. There are the people who are just sort of like really nasty, mean villains, and I love writing those too. And then I like the villains who sort of like you think are really good in the book, and then they all of a sudden turn out to be a really terrible person, and you're like, oh my god. And I love sort of like the turn of the screw kind of thing. And I like villains that elicit a response. I know, obviously, you can't really trust a response when it's from your own mother. But when my mom finished Mystic City, she said, oh, I hope that this person dies in the next book because they're so evil and terrible. And then I just was like, oh, well, maybe I should have that person live just to...
In Beautiful Creatures, the 4th book comes out on October 23rd, the last book. So there are 4 books, and you know they're relatively fat. So there are a lot of villains. One of the villains is Lena's mother, which is you know, obviously problematic if your mom is, you know, one of your greatest adversaries. And as the series goes on, you kind of learn that there are more unexpected villains. There's that even maybe the smaller ones don't know about. There's a grand scheme. My stepdad is he's a retired undercover cop in the inner city in DC, and he worked in a lot of different divisions. And I've always been really interested in what makes people the way they are. And the fact that even someone, you know, as Nicole said, like Hitler, who can do something so horrible, you know, what leads a person to that? You know, is it, you know, is it a mental defect? Is it a horrible childhood? Is it something terrible that was done to them? And we have a lot of backstory in our books because the villains are flawed, and they don't know they're villains. They think they're doing the right thing, or, you know, she's helping her daughter. This is for a greater good. It's a means to an end. But I'm always interested in what's the villain's story. Not only are they flawed, but why are they flawed? You know, and it doesn't in any way justify what they're doing, but I think it makes them more interesting. Because I think what makes a villain compelling, when you think about, you know, something classic, you know, you think about, like, you know, Harry Potter, and you think about Voldemort. The minute you find out why they're so evil and you hear their backstory, they immediately become more dimensional, more interesting. And I'm a huge comic book fan, and I feel the same way about, you know, comic book villains, like the hardcore ones, you know, the ones that are really damaged. Those are the ones that are most interesting. So for us, the challenge was really, how do we create a backstory or an origin, whether it was from their childhood or one specific incident, the betrayal, you know, from someone really close to them, something that kind of tips the scale. One of my favorite villains is Magneto from the comic books, not necessarily from the movies, because Magneto, you know, he walks the line. Like, there are moments where he's heroic and he's absolutely doing the right thing, and for certain people, for his people, he is doing the right thing. But he's also, like, murdering people. So it's, you know what I mean? It is the two sides of the same coin. So I really like to know what are the flaws, and most importantly, what caused them? How did that villain become that way? And the more gruesome or painful the story, for me, the better. And I would agree with Theo. Margie always says, whenever I'm in a bad mood, I kill someone in the book. I believe that, like, you know, a lot of people should die, and I do not believe in the happy ending where every single major character magically lives and makes it through to the end.
Well, if you've got any questions for our panelists, this is the time. We don't have a guest mic here, so come on up. Walk towards me. We're recording this for the radio, so we need you to speak. Say your name, where you're from, and address the panel.
My name's Ryan Brown. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. What are some other examples of, like, mythology that you guys use to base your characters on?
Did you want to address that to anybody in particular, or just in general?
I used Hindu mythology for the first Repairman Jack book. I wanted something that Americans hadn't heard of. This was back in the 80s. So I went to libraries, I went through something called a card file. You know? There were no Googles back then. And it took me a long, long time to come up with something called a Rakesh, which was a Hindu temple demon. And so I used that. And depending on what dialect it is, it's not Rakshasa in a lot of dialects. But no one had ever heard of it, so I thought that was cool for me. But now if they Google it, you get 250,000 hits.
Anybody else? No? Okay, let's take our next question. Say your name.
My name is Nathan from Fort Worth, Texas. And my question was, when you're drawing on, and this is for anybody, when you're drawing on mythology and you find that you're running into problems with some kind of, you need to slightly tweak the mythology in order to fit your mythos, or something has changed or you need to change something, do you ever worry about stepping on people's toes, that you're actually altering real mythology, or do you say, oh no, this guy's name's Foki, he's not Loki, you know, it's or something like that?
It's my world. I get to do what I want. Now I might have to justify it, and I'm very careful to not step on toes when I justify changing something, but it's my world. I can change it if I want to.
Thank you.
Can I add to that? Sometimes you just change for convenience too. I mean, the Rakshasa are shapeshifters. I didn't want to get into that. I didn't want to open that can of worms, so I just said they weren't.
It's your story, damn it.
My name is Cassandra. I'm from Grand Forks, North Dakota. Each one of you talked about how you were very inspired by previous bodies of work. So when you're writing your own work, what do you how do you ensure that even though you're drawing from something that existed, or maybe you loved something before, for example, Magneto, how do you ensure that you're not just recreating that in your work, that you're being unique?
I think you have to, basically, we're retelling mythology in a lot of ways, right? We're updating it for the modern world, because the reason that those stories were told, you know, back in the day was, you know, there were specific dangers that they were warning against. And there were reasons for those particular gods to exist for those various cultures. Well, you know, now we're basically writing for an American audience. I mean, of course, you know, some of us get published elsewhere too, but we're primarily writing for an American audience. And we have the chance to either introduce for the first time some of these myths to the audience here, or update them in a way that makes sense in our contemporary milieu. So it's, I think it's fascinating and fun, and I think everybody understands coming to the genre, you know, reading it, that, you know, this is not a non-fiction work or anything like that. It's not going to be a definitive work on this particular mythology, but, you know, there should be something here that if I find it interesting, I can go and, you know, get the original cool stuff.
I think there's also something, there's just something about a writer's voice and what you bring to a story, and I think, you know, taking Romeo and Juliet told by Shakespeare is going to be much different than that same story told by, you know, J.K. Rowling or something. So I think obviously you don't want to copy something that's been done, but I think having really a unique viewpoint as a writer and your own style and your own characters and something that you really want to say is going to help set your work apart.
Hi, my name is Veronica, and I'd like to know if any of you struggle with, God, I have this great story in my head, but it's torture to put it on paper or the screen, one word at a time, and how do you deal with that? And if any of you have an interesting story about how you first got published.
Usually when that happens for me, I think it's important to remember that you're allowed to suck as a writer, and the process of eventually beating the suck out of your writing, as I call it, will happen. I will then, if I have a cool idea that's not quite coming out or whatever, I will vomit a bunch of words, because I can fix a pile of words. I can clean that up. I can't fix zero. You know what I'm saying? So I'll allow myself to write wretched versions of things for myself, and that kind of gets me going, and then there's something I can work with versus a blank page at that point.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. I'm a college professor, and I teach one class of basic composition. And so my freshmen, they just stare at me, and I give them an essay, and they're like, I can't do this. And I'm like, well, write a sentence. And then they're like, but it's a bad sentence. And I'm like, well, then write another bad sentence. And they keep writing bad sentences. And then I'm like, now you have a rough draft. And it's, you know, and I'm like, and I get to the point by the end of the semester where I'm like, because what is a rough draft? And they all go, rough. You have to have something to fix, so don't worry about perfection, especially on that first draft. Just get it out. Don't believe in a muse. There's no such thing as a muse.
There is too.
There's not a muse.
It's called coffee.
Yeah. Coffee and sometimes alcohol. There's no such thing as a muse. All you have are the tools of your craft, which are your butt, a chair, and your fingertips to either write or type. And get it out, and then fix it, make it better.
And sometimes I find that you can write something really bad, and even if that's not going to be the draft that you're going to use for anything, sometimes the writing of something bad will lead you to a really good idea, or a really good character, or a really good chapter. I had to write a short story for an anthology because my friend talked me into it that I totally didn't want to do. And I wasn't at that time, and now I've written a bunch of short stories, but I didn't really write short stories. And I wrote this short story, and the first one I wrote was really bad. But there was like one cool part of it, and my husband was like, that story is really bad, except for the one part. So then I rewrote the story only about the one part. And it's interesting because even though it's very different, that one story ended up sparking the idea for my solo novel, Unbreakable, that comes out next year. And it's totally different, but it was like, while I was writing that, I finished, and I was like, I really liked that subject. I liked writing that. And then I thought, and this one part of it was the most fun, and you know what I'm saying? So sometimes, even if you're not gonna, and it's not gonna be your novel, sometimes you're gonna write something when you think you're writing your novel that could actually lead you to the novel, or the story, or the song that is gonna be your novel. So, in a way, I think there's no writing is wasted.
Well, thank you. We didn't get to your questions, I apologize. We're just about out of time. We didn't get to daddy issues, or tattoos, or kicking ass, or sex, or who had the sexiest covers, Kevin.
Thank you for answering that question.
But we have created the perfect urban fantasy, and I would like to thank our guests, Cami Garcia, Theo Lawrence, Kevin Hearne, Nicole Peeler, Anton Strout, Allison Pang, Faith Hunter, and Paul Wilson. Thank you very much for coming out today. Enjoy the rest of the time. Thank you, guys.
We're going to be at the autograph tables a little later, 1:45. So you should come and see us there and ask your questions if you still have them.
Evan, what do you do to admit the book's really about a